Good afternoon. The weekend starts here. Hopefully you've had a fantastic conference so far, and I'm not going to change that experience for you. The only way I've found of explaining the true hell of microservices is with song. Maybe it's because you feel hellish whilst you watch and listen to it. I don't know. But it's the best way, I think, to explain it. So if my ever-present AV expert is cool, then we'll get started. Whoa. Anyone like the ticking? Now you see me record it. By the way, ScreenFlow, fantastic app for doing that sort of thing. Can we come out? Yay. Let's go do this instead. Right, so hopefully that's woken us all up after a fantastic lunch. I'd like to say thank you for everyone for actually coming to this conference and for all the conference organizers that have absolutely killed themselves to put it together. Last year I was here, temporarily. I almost made it to my talk. I rode my motorcycle all the way from England, perfectly safely. And then in a demonstration for you and only you, I showed you just how fragile a system can be and managed to stop my motorcycle behind a rather lovely German lady who decided to reverse into me. So I didn't make it. I had a 7-hour ride back to Düsseldorf, unfortunately. But there you go. I'm here today, and I'm glad to be back. Right, so that song, the first time I performed it, I did it on the QE2 stage because I felt that it would be a nice way of easing into this subject, the painful subject of microservices when they go hellishly wrong. I also thought it would be a nice way of calming myself down, seeing as at that moment in time, I was planning to ask my fiancée to marry me, or my future fiancée to marry me, in front of 400 people. As you can see, I am risk-averse. Luckily, it all went to plan, sort of, and we are safe on that bike, by the way. We're doing fine. And things are going wonderfully well. And things are going well in microservices land because we've got a pretty busy conference here. And the other conferences that I go to also tend to be quite busy, and the track and the whole topic area seems to be lifting off nicely. So, as we were talking about yesterday, everything's absolutely awesome now, right? We're all great at this. We're doing it. It's wonderful. Or is it a bit more like that? Is there a little bit of that in the sidelines? People not being entirely honest about how painful this approach is? Now, up until quite recently, I was a consultant. I'm now a reformed consultant. That's quite nice. I always think that there should be a rehab for that. And now I can say that, honestly, sometimes when I encounter clients, and when I used to encounter clients, this is pretty much how it looked. There was an aggression towards the topic. And I noticed that it got worse as time went on. In fact, some of the time, if I wasn't careful, as a consultant, I ended up looking a little bit like the bingo player that's just used every piece of jargon at once to win. I've done microservices, event-driven microservices, reactive event-driven microservices. I win. And what I was seeing is my clients were kind of hitting this problem. And the problem's a serious one. So despite all the fun earlier, the problem is a hump. Now, in the early days of my career, I was an agile consultant and coach. Please don't kill me before I get to the door. As that highly valuable member of the team, I found that more often than not, I was brought into organizations who had hit a hump of their own. They'd hit the agile adoption hump. What had happened, almost to every single case, was someone had read a book and just done it, or had gone to a talk and just done it. Now, that isn't how they explained it. What they did is they said, we've decided to follow the doctrine of X. We may be nothing like X, but we've followed the doctrine thereof. And what happened was that for 9 or 12 months, they'd gone through hell, absolute pain, becoming agile as they thought they were, to find themselves asked an awkward question. And that question was, why have you done it? You spent a lot of money, guys. What have we got for it now? And what I found was there was people really struggling to answer that question. A lot of people have become incredibly agile in terms of Scrum application and other ways of organizing work. And then being asked, okay, what have we got now for this? And they didn't have a great answer. So they were actually bringing in consultants to give them a better answer. I was brought in. Can you help me figure out how much better things are now than they were before? I don't know what you were like before, but okay, I'll try. Before we get onto microservices, because I think microservices is hitting the same hump at the moment in some clients anyway, and I'd like to help them, if they are in the hump of microservices and are starting to feel a little bit downtrodden with it, or being asked the awkward question, why have we done this? If they're there, I'm going to help them understand the characteristics of the hump, but equally, I'm going to give you guys some opportunities to avoid it. Okay, so first of all, let's start with a definition. Everyone seems to have a definition of microservices. It's probably the greatest measure of a wonderfully consult-driven project or technology or approach when we've all got different definitions for it. We can't really agree what it is. But my favorite definition, I actually do this on the courses I used to run, is I used to ask people to go and search for the best definition of microservices as they could find it. Slightly awkward, because they found some of mine that have changed. But at the same time, they go out and they find some excellent ones. And one guy, actually at the BBC in London, came up with the best I've ever seen. This next slide, if you take one thing away from this slide set, this next slide just nails it. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. And though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree. so that the birds come and perch in its branches. If you cannot quote gospel, then what can you do in terms of defining microservices? I think that's excellent. We actually have doctrine that we're stealing from other doctrines. Brilliant. It's genius. It's like meta. Okay, so some of my preferred definitions, like from Adrian yesterday and today, and the guys have been talking about this one, I've seen this a few times now, I quite like it. I like the fact we have service-oriented architecture in there, because even I started to resist this in the early days. Oh, please don't call it SOA. Not only is it the most awful acronym in Dutch, but it's also one of those annoying things that we've all gone through, the hell of SOA in the past, and it didn't really give us anything more, and I'm really worried that we're going to reinvigorate that part of the industry. But truthfully, of course it's a service-oriented architecture. It's got it in the title. I tended to emphasize something slightly different. I wanted to emphasize change. I saw a lot of people trying to get something out of their system they were not getting before. And so I emphasized, rather than the pieces, I wasn't really so worried about the size of the pieces. I was really worried about what the system could do that it couldn't do before. And in particular, I wanted to address an old enemy of mine as a consultant. You see, as a consultant, I was an ethical one. They do exist. I was someone who actually wanted to improve the situation whilst I was there. And as that person, I actually had an enemy that I was helping people fight. And I'll tell you a quick story now. So apologies if you've heard it before. But this is the enemy, one of the enemies that I personally detest in our industry. And so you don't know me very well if you haven't seen me speak before. But if you have, you'll know what I'm going to do next. I'm going to ask you to shut your eyes. It helps. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story, and I want you to get in the moment. I want you to feel the pain this moment. I want you to feel my pain. That's how bad it's going to be. I'm going to have a beer whilst I do this. It's that bad. Okay, so those of you that trust me, shut your eyes, and I'm going to tell you a little story. And apologies if you heard it before. Okay, so it's sprint 10 or iteration 10 or whatever you want to call it, when there's a significant amount of work that you've done and things are going absolutely great. The stakeholders are happy. You're happy. The world is good. You jump on your motorcycle and you ride across the South Downs of England on your way into work, or maybe that's just me. And the sun is out, the birds are tweeting in the trees, and things could not be better. You get into work, and you can feel that buzz. There are rock stars in the room, as far as everyone can tell. The team are feeling it. Okay, it's great. Everyone's happy. It could not be better. So you all gather for your stand-up meeting, and you do what anyone sensible in a stand-up meeting does, which is sit down. And once you've got the inevitable status updates out of the way, you move on to the matters of the day. You know, what's going to be the challenges today? What do I need help on? Those sorts of good things. And you can still feel the buzz. Yes, it's hard, but you're winning. And you cannot help but think maybe, just maybe this time, we've got it right. And then, the one phrase you've been dreading is uttered by the senior stakeholder on the project. She turns around and she says, I just want one small change. And at that moment, you go through several emotions. The first emotion, anger. How dare you change your mind? How dare you? I could cancel the sprint. I can do that. It's written in the book. I can change it all up on you. I can hurt you on this. Okay, the second emotion's more interesting. It's guilt. Because deep down, you know this could have been a small change, or it could have been at least a proportional change to the real ask here. But it's not. Because it's now woefully in conflict with all of the assumptions you made yesterday. You see, we are engines of legacy, which, as we mentioned yesterday, should be a good thing. But we are. Legacy is everything you wrote before lunch, today. Some poor person's going to read it. I have to maintain it. I hope. There's a lovely quote I saw on Twitter saying, yeah, we should write code assuming that the next person to read it is actually a dangerous psychopath and knows where you live. Changes the way you write anything. I write books sometimes. I attempt to write books, and I have that same vision. I'm actually writing for a psychopath that will actually punish me if I leave them not understanding what I'm saying. Same thing in your code. And what you're hitting here with this guilt, oh, by the way, there's a couple of great ways of overcoming this guilt. We do use them. We have 2 fantastic lies that we use. You can open your eyes now, by the way. Hopefully you're in that moment. Okay, you're feeling the pain, right? You're feeling that guilt, and you've got that guilt in your mind. Okay, the 2 lies. First lie, technical debt. Technical debt's a real thing. Of course it is. But we use it beautifully at this point. Because technical debt is a wonderful lie. Not only does it say, it's not our fault, but you've accrued the debt. It's a beautiful lie. It's like the credit card company phoning you up and saying, I know you haven't used us, but we just kept charging. You didn't know. It's fine. Technical debt is supposed to be something that's encompassed when you know you're doing it. Otherwise, it's technical surprise. The other one is refactoring. It's a lesser lie of the 2. Refactoring, of course, is an important practice in my software development and probably in yours too. But we don't use it at this point in time in its true sense. We say things like, we're going to do refactoring for the next 3-4 weeks. Refactoring cannot take 4 weeks. Okay? As a technique, it is one small change, usually a line of code. If it takes you 4 weeks to change a line of code, we have a different issue. So we're not really refactoring at that point. If you say it's going to take 3 or 4 weeks, what you're doing is redesign. Because the software you've built is built on a set of assumptions that are now in conflict with reality, and they are hitting the elephant in the stand-up. The elephant is a silent participant in your stand-up. It's called all your code. It is sitting there waiting for you to be in conflict with reality, because it's sitting there going, I can't change. And so what I'm trying to do here is explain that one of the things we should be looking for is how to beat things like the elephant in the stand-up. And that means when we look at microservices, in some sense, I think we're looking at the wrong thing. The term itself is a little awkward. The term encourages us to look at the things, the tininess of them. It's in their title, micro, as opposed to nano, or tera, or my goodness, we really are obsessed with size, aren't we? I think the term's a little bit wrong, and it may drive us in the wrong way of thinking. Because size doesn't really matter. We're always telling people this. Size just doesn't matter. And generally speaking, slot doesn't matter either. I find it very difficult to measure things by slot. I was asked a while back to review a book on beautiful code. And I'll be honest, I had to refuse. Because as far as I could tell, the code in there was not beautiful. It was complicated. It was hard to read. It was very clever. But it was not beautiful by how I would define it. I want cartoon code. I want the equivalent of Calvin and Hobbes' 3 panels with slightly less laughs. That's all I'm looking for from the code in terms of comprehension. What does matter is cognitive overhead. What's going on in your brains? When I was learning to write head-first books, one of the first things they taught you was not how to lay out the wonderful diagrams and get everyone to, participate in the sketches or whatever. It was what's in someone's brain when they're reading your book. How many things are they concentrating on at once? And minimize that, because the more you have in your head, the harder it is. The fact is, regardless of gender, we really can focus on one thing at once. I'm not going to get into System 1, System 2 discussions in terms of our brains, but really, at one time, consciously, you're focusing on one thing. Right now, you're focusing on the sound of my voice, or your iPads, or your phones, or something else. But generally speaking, one thing at once. The rest of your brain might be doing other things as well, but your conscious mind is looking at one thing at once. And so the challenge here is when you're thinking about humans working with your system, we want some advantages from that system, and it's not really about what's in the system, it's what can you do with the system that you couldn't do before. If you read the wonderful book, The Phoenix Project, it's about what they can do with that system that they couldn't do before. In fact, if anything, that system was actively trying to kill them. I'm a motorcyclist. I view the road systems in a particular way. I view other road users in a particular way. If you drive cars, you don't view them this way. On a motorcycle, You look at the world as it's not like they're passively out there trying to, you might cause accidents. You assume that everyone is A, psychopathic and wants to kill you. Okay, then you survive on a motorcycle. Okay, it's the same thing with our software systems. They're out to get us. Okay, but we can work with that as long as we know it. Same thing on a motorcycle. Okay. So what is the single biggest limiting factor on change? Is it the size of the pieces? Not entirely, no. Helps, but it's not the size of the pieces. It tends to be you. You're the single biggest force resisting change in your software. Your comprehension of what it does. If you can't comprehend a piece of software, you can't change, well, you shouldn't change it. I would argue that many do. I've been there myself. Okay? There's no tests. That's okay, I'll just tinker. So it's about you and comprehension, which is why microservices is interesting, because if we talk about simple parts of the system, human comprehension can be maximized for. And really that pushes it, though. It's not really about the things in the system, it's the things that happen. We need to focus on the activities in the systems in order to comprehend what microservices we should have. One of the things I teach on my course is a technique about how you decide what microservices you should have at all, if any. And that technique is a simple thinking tool that leads you towards small pieces, yes, typically small because we want them to be single purpose so they can be comprehensible. But we also really want them to be single activity. It's about the things that happen. Now, if you're an OO developer, that's a little awkward because you're used to thinking in terms of something that does two things at once anyway. State and behavior. Whereas if you come from a functional background, saying it does one thing and one thing only seems quite natural. I'm not saying it's better or worse, just saying that be aware of the thinking processes that lead you to these simple parts. And that leads us to what systemic properties do we want to have? If you have hit the microservices hump, chances are you've forgotten what you were going for. Maybe it's still there as a possibility. Maybe in the initial project inception ideas, there was, we want things to be better because of X. But it's usually not because we want microservices. Okay, we want something more from the system. And I usually find that people want their system to be able to evolve and change and support innovation and competitive advantage. So it's not what you have, it's what you can do with it. Keep reminding yourselves of that, and the hump will be kept somewhat at bay. But there is a big challenge to do with this. So what you want will be different. Depending on who you are, we've got probably a very rich sample of different projects, products, social environments in just the companies and people that are here. So the big challenge is, if you listen to us on stage, we'll tell you, we'll probably have something that we value, that we're telling you to aim for when you build your microservice-based systems, but we should probably be more explicit about it. So some companies absolutely need stability. I worked with a company once that wanted to become more agile. I was brought in as an agile consultant. Again, I apologize for these things. We do strange things for money in our past. And one of the things I realized very quickly on arrival into this company is that everyone seemed to be quite excited about being agile, but no one really understood why. So I went and spoke to the board and asked, why are we doing this? And they said, well, we actually don't want to be agile. We don't need it. This was a family-run business, an insurance house. They had no desire to innovate or change their industry. They were fine as far as they were concerned. You can argue about this strategy here in a different manner, but that was their take. So I said to them, right, why do you need agility then? Why do you need to be able to pivot and change and make things different? We don't. We just want to keep people happy in the company. So we give them this agile thing, right? We gave them other stuff before. We gave them C++ and Lord knows what else, and Java eventually, and other things. Great, we gave them all that. That made them happy. Now we're going to give them agile, because that will make them happy too. So that was interesting. So a company that absolutely optimizes purely just for the static, the stability. They'd be upset if they couldn't do their business, don't get me wrong, but they don't really need to change. Some value speed. If you're starting off in your venture as a company, or even if you're a big company and you're frightened of someone else, many of those at the moment, speed is usually the game. Can we be quicker than the others? Quicker with good direction, I would argue, is probably a nice idea. You can't just be faster. You know, the whole idea of being very, very fast with a wonderful car straight into a brick wall does bear into mind when these happen. So, no, you usually want steering going the right way, but speed is a good option. With speed, you'd like agility. Do you need to be able to change and move? Okay, again, something to value in the system. And finally, really what agility was always about, which was about adaptability. Can you adapt to what's going on? Can you adapt to change? Can you adapt to epiphanies in the business for new things we need to do? Some actually value volatility in their systems. They like the system to be volatile and changeable, and they see value in that. And some even value one of my favorite terms, antifragility. If you're not familiar with the term, look up Taleb's book on antifragile. Wonderful idea, the idea that a system, when stressed, will improve. Simple as that. If you've used Chaos Monkey, you kind of know what it's all about. Or at least you now know why Chaos Monkey's there. And other bits like that. So microservices can enable these things when done right. Okay, you can achieve speed. You can achieve adaptability. You can achieve a degree of anti-fragility. However, if you go about it the wrong way, you won't. You'll just have lots of small pieces that are as brittle as they were before. And that's the real danger. That's where the hump has its characteristics. It's that many are breaking the systems down into parts that are reflective of the original system that was there. We talked about this yesterday about Conway's law. If your company is brittle and organized a certain way, and the monolith is organized a certain way, then your microservices will be organized a certain way, and you may not improve at all. Okay, so how do we do these things? We have a superpower. In software design, we rarely innovate or come up with new things in software. I would argue microservices and many of the techniques that were around the whole being cloud native ideas, they are good, they are new. They're something that we've actually invented. Many of the things we do in our industry is take other people's lessons and drag them in and hope they might be useful. And even when they're not useful, we sometimes stick with them because we're certified in them. But we do have our superpower, and that tends to be what a domain-driven design. If you haven't looked into domain-driven design, please do. Many of the answers about what your microservices should be and how they should interact with one another, how you should think about them, can come from the techniques in DDD. Unfortunately, DDD has got a bit of a bad reputation. Does anyone know the key single anti-pattern of DDD that many people have used? Anyone know? Anyone dissatisfied with something? Everyone heard of DDD? Shame on you. Hey, you're cool. Anything wrong with it? Anything you dislike about it? Domain objects. Domain objects at the center of the universe. These poor little classes are used in everything. They're stored to databases. They're backing forms in your front end. They're sent as messages. They are worked to death. If you're in Java, they have more annotation than Java these days. They can do everything, and they don't want to do any of it. And the problem is, what you're looking at is a huge amount of coupling in your system. So the problem is that whilst we've got DDD, for many years we went down a strange path of domain objects. And now I would put to you that the biggest issue with DDD is the domain objects at the center of the universe anti-pattern. Okay, so if we can discard that little beast, what does that leave us with? Well, the way I teach it is we use a little tool called the Life Preserver, which is a couple of circles. As a consultant, I can do three things. I can draw circles, squares, sometimes, and triangles. Okay, now you're all consultants. Triple your income. Or not. Depends how your ethics are, really. Yeah, as a consultant, so Life Preserver is a couple of circles. And I ask people to think about simple components. I don't care if they're microservices just yet, but simple components and how they talk to one another. It's the only tool I've come across that asks you to consider change. Asks you to consider how the system is decoupled. Moves you towards microservices. The other patterns that you're going to need in your toolbox to avoid the microservices hump are events. Remember I said it's not about the things, it's the things that happen. We have a description for things that happen in DDD. We call them events. Okay, facts. And it turns out this is a really incredibly useful tool. You can actually bridge several different disciplines with just this one. You can talk to non-technical stakeholders. They will think in terms of events. If you go to a non-technical stakeholder, I've got 15 microservices, and this one does this, and that one does that, you're going to kill them. But if you say to them what happens, tell me when this system works, what you want to happen in this system. And we'll start to talk in terms of the facts and events of the system. So it's a great ubiquitous language we can use. Turns out the ubiquitous language has got nothing to do with, domain objects, has everything to do with events. Once you've got events, you can bridge to another community. The madness of our industry. Think about this. We have a whole collection of people here that are probably in the architect, designer, developer kind of mindset. And there's a whole mass of other people out there that are doing data science. And they're not here. How crazy? How crazy? We're all in software. We're all trying to make these systems do something, and we partitioned it. Well, we have a way of bridging this. I was invited to one of this country's largest automobile manufacturers, not the one that got in trouble recently. I was nothing to do with that software. Although, what great software. Anyway, no, I was nothing to do with it. So I was invited, and the first thing they said is, we've got this data science group, and we're going to get you to do data science with us. And I walked in, and the first thing they said is, what's the minimal set of metadata we need to store in our data system? And I thought it was an interesting problem, because they've been doing it for years, so it was probably a bit late to ask, but okay. Well, facts. Store a fact. What do you want to know about a fact in order for it to be self-describing and useful in the future? When you note something down, you don't probably note down just one little datum from it, one little piece of data. You note down a collection, a small collection of things. And generally, you don't want it to change. So it tends to be immutable. So I described it to these very smart data scientists that what they needed to store was facts and events, not just chunks of data. In fact, terminology-wise, often a good data scientist, when they're talking about data, is talking about a fact. So we can actually bridge into these other spheres as well, just by using events. And event lakes, which can get very big. Now, you'll be very careful here, data lakes. Data lakes often become data swamps. That's mainly because people are not focusing on storing facts. They're just storing the data. Give me all the data. Give it all. I'll figure out what we'll do with it later. That almost rhymes. The issue here is with what's inside that system. You can refine it just a touch and make it eminently more usable if you describe it in terms of facts and events. So we end up with event lakes. Okay. Within that, we can start to talk about streams of events. This is how we comprehend our microservice-based systems. We can talk in terms of streams. We have another insanity in our industry. We have the reactive group, and we have the microservices group. And some of us are talking, but not many. And we could talk a lot more, because the two things are starting to address many of the same concepts. And so that's fantastic. So we can start to have a common terminology, another ubiquitous language, events and event streams. And then we can start to understand these event streams. You know what? We don't have to invent anything here. Data scientists already get this. They talk in terms of the 3 Vs. Volume, variety, and velocity. When you're trying to understand whether you can cope with certain latencies in your system, what is the latency of an event's promulgation through the system? What is acceptable? Think about the events. It's the events and their speed through the system that tend to matter most. And so we need to know the volume and variety and velocity. And a lovely gentleman over in Spain actually reminded me there's another one. He said, we always forget this one. Veracity. Are these facts believable or not? You know, has someone just injected rubbish into the system? So we have to understand that too. That's all good. What do we do with these events and these streams of events? We can build aggregates. We can build services that have a certain perspective on the world. We don't know what we're doing with these things yet. I don't know if you've seen me speak before, but as software developers, we should have a mantra. We don't know what we're doing. They don't know what they want. And that's situation normal. I've been to so many companies where they said, we're just building another like that. But the next part of the sentence is always intriguing. Because it's another one like that, but we're doing these other things differently. But they're small. Don't worry about those. Okay? The fact that you've just introduced a huge amount of difference between the two systems. I mean, the classic one I used to get as a Spring guy was, we're going to re-implement it in Spring. It's not going to change. We're just going to adopt an entirely different framework and stack. That's all right then. No risk. Let's give it a go. Okay, but back to aggregates. Aggregates are perspectives on the system. They're really useful because they take events and they translate them into some knowledge of the system. And we don't even know yet what we're going to do with that knowledge because we don't know what we're doing and they don't know what they want. Okay, because then what we can do is the next step is a refinement step. We can move towards views. Views are optimized for answers. So when someone says, I want to know how many users of the system I've got logged on at once, it's a view that answers this. Aggregates will tell views what's happened as far as their perspective on the system and on the world is. Aggregates are transactional. That's the unit boundary of transactions is in your aggregates, not across aggregates. Please don't do that. Please don't even attempt it. Okay? The aggregate itself is always consistent according to the events it's seen. Okay? Views are also always consistent to the events they've seen. Yes, I am describing an eventually consistent system. But the tragic misunderstanding of eventual consistency is people think that an eventually consistent system is inconsistent. It's not. It'll just get there. And at any given moment in time, it is consistent. The views are consistent. The aggregates are consistent. Not necessarily completely to one another. That's what we have to deal with. That's where the complexity is. But the important thing is that these things are actually consistent at any given moment in time, according to the events they've seen. Okay, so we've got this as the internal patterns of our microservice-based system. I'm giving you now the way I think of my microservices. I don't think I'm going to create a microservice. I think, am I going to create an aggregate? What events is it going to consume? What is it going to produce that might be useful to views that I don't even know what they are yet? But what can it kick out? What can it know? Once we have that, we have to start thinking about the boundaries, the integrations with the outside world. Whether the outside world be another group internally, maybe another business department, or whether it be out into the outer world. Either way, it's out of your control. So you keep it at arm's length. You create adapters and gateways in order to handle the outside world. In fact, I would argue there's a great quote from Sam about the fact that microservices are not about reuse, they're about speed. And time to market, I think was the phrase. Fantastic. Where do we get reuse then? Because reuse is something that we would probably still like. We can actually get it, but we have to design for it. And generally speaking, I'm not reusing microservices. I'm reusing gateways. Someone wants to reuse the system in a particular way, I'll create, for want of another phrase, a facade that gives them what they want. Okay. And with all this, what's the special? That is actually McDonald's special sauce. Doesn't look very special, does it? Anyway, yes. Mayonnaise out in the sun for far too long. This is the special sauce. The special sauce of the system. What is enabled by the system? What can we do in the system now that we couldn't do before? Event sourcing. Another tragically misunderstood term. Event sourcing allows us to reduce the importance of state in our system. It moves the state somewhere else, this is true, but it reduces the importance of us knowing exactly what our state has to be at the beginning, because we don't. What event sourcing simply says is store the important events and then replay them. If you ever want to comprehend your system in the future, a replay is how you do so. So if you aren't looking at event sourcing in your microservice-based systems, please do, because you will find yourself worried less about the migration of state. The great story that Greg Young gives about event sourcing is this idea that you've got a database, you do a migration in production to the new system, seems to have gone fine. You've got that little script. Migration has two-way scripts, right? You go forward and back. We only ever want to use the back at that moment in time. Anytime in the future, if we use back, we lose data. So the pain here is in 7 days' time when you realize you made a mistake. And now the data's gone. And where are you? All you've captured is a snapshot. All you've got is an aggregate, actually. So keeping event sourcing is a way of hedging your bets. You don't know how you're going to interpret things yet. Just keep them available. Keep the events available, and you can interpret them better later on. Okay, so what's the downside of microservices? Even if you do these things, what's the downside? What's the challenge? I alluded to it last night on the panel. I need to tell you one more story, and I know I'm running a little bit out of time now. Okay, but I'm going to tell you a story about how to build an app. It's going to be an incredibly exciting application. It's going to be a to-do app. Because the world doesn't have enough of these. So this is what the business are thinking, right? We're going to do a to-do app. You're sitting there, you're having coffee. When I say the business, you could be a startup, right? You're sitting there having coffee, and you're trying to decide what we're going to do to change the world, and we've decided on a to-do app. And you're going to create a beautiful-looking app and web UI for interacting with to-do lists. Wow. That's where the money from the venture capitalists are coming from. To do that, we need to write a back end, I'm sure. Service, perhaps. We'll use the word service. That stores to-do lists so that they can be made available across devices and the web. And you can write, we need to write some tests, all right? We're not crazy. We do realize that tests is a good idea. So we need to write some tests to make sure it functions. So that's it. We've sat down, we've got our napkin out, these are our phrases on it. We're off to the VC who is ready for us. So we're feeling great. I love these stock photos. Really, has anyone not used them with a tongue-in-cheek idea on this? But, you are a long way away from where you think you are when you have this idea and this napkin in your hand. And then the worst thing that could possibly happen is you actually do get the money, because then you've actually got to do something with it. So anyway, before we get into the final arc of this story, I should warn you. Does anyone here suffer from allergies? Yeah? Okay. Anyone suffer from allergies to PowerPoint slides? That's the worst allergy ever. I should say that. I've got a son who suffers from severe allergies. And if you follow me on Twitter, please, there's a campaign at the moment in the UK, serious moment, a campaign in the UK to actually get people, when they say may contain, that's like saying could kill your child. They put may contain nuts on stuff. If he comes into contact with a tiny amount of peanut, he dies. Can you imagine what it's like in restaurants when we tell the chef this? Anyway, so according to slide theorists, in an average presentation, there are actually slide theorists in this industry. Have you noticed that? Do presentation skills courses, and they tell you about slides. Like, that's the hard part. Anyway, slide theorists would have us believe that for every slide, we should have about 2 minutes of conversation with you. But I think that's way too easy. What we're going to do now is 40 slides in 2 minutes. So get ready for PowerPoint poisoning. Are you ready? Okay. This is what you're going to need to do. As well as those napkin 4 statements, you can do this. You're going to set up source code control and an issue tracker, manage user accounts, sign up, sign in, and password management. Collect analytics from your app and web UI about how people use your app. Build and test your app across multiple devices and OS versions. Gather information on app crashes and bugs and feed this back into the issue catalog or backlog. Test your web UI across multiple browsers and versions. Document the API that the native apps and web app depend on. Push client-side assets to CDNs and keep them up to date. Version your API so that you can evolve client apps and the backing service independently. Implement the rate limiting for requests. Set up a CI service that monitors your repository for changes built. Test your software. Set up a CD service that deploys new version of your software to your chosen deployment platform. Set up networking rules so that the components of your backend can see each other and are protected from other traffic. Enable the components of your backend service, e.g. the API, implementation, and database to find each other. Ensure the service can survive failure. Monitor request latency. Create new instances if existing ones failed, and transparently reconnect service components. Provide mechanisms to scale up and down service capacity. Trace requests all the way through the system. Provide audit logs of all changes made to production systems. Set up an alerting mechanism for problems in production. Put in place a DR solution and test it. Backup and recovery process of data. Create operational playbooks and test your plays. Put in place automation failure testing, Simians, etc. Ensure service has no security weaknesses. We talked about security earlier on. We all know it's important now. Please wash your hands. Monitor CV reports for all components in your stack and replace as soon as a vulnerability is found. Devise deployment schemes for e.g. blue-green fails rollout and roll back. Collect logs from all components for analysis. Enable marketing to run A/B and feature testing. Monitor and visualize all of the above and ensure that things continue to flow smoothly through the pipeline. Package all of your application components in a suitable form for deployment. Manage stand-up and tear-down of your dev and test environments. And that's before we get to service configuration, service discovery, bulkheads, circuit breakers, event stores, messaging, CQRS, language selection, APIs, API gateways, lakes, routing, security. We had such a simple napkin earlier. Thank you. So, and this is just the technical stuff. All right. It does lead you a bit with that. Can you imagine if that all occurred to you in the coffee shop just with your napkin in front of you? No one would start anything ever. And the issue is really what you're thinking is when you go to market, this is what you want. This is what I want anyway. It's what I got. But this is this is what I'm sort of given, right? The tooling kind of says this, and build it yourself. Enjoy. It's great. And you don't tell this to the VCs. What you do is you tell them you need 100 million to do anything. And they say, well, we've seen your napkin. It doesn't seem like much. And you're right, no, it doesn't. But then you show them the other stuff. And it becomes a pain. So what's the real problem here? Stepping back. One of the things I like to do with this industry is I like to step back a lot and look at other industries and see the madness that we've created. There is a general problem in microservices land. And it's sort of related to the hump in microservices. And that issue comes down to our user experience. Now, I do apologize for anyone who came to this talk expecting a long discussion on user experience. I have only a few slides left, and I have 5 minutes, according to my gentleman here. Right, so the UX, right, I mean the developer user experience of microservices. You see, the developer user experience of microservices is painful. We have a whole conference dedicated to that pain, if you think about it. If you want to take a negative view of each talk. It's hard, really hard. It gets worse because it's actually the development and operations challenge of microservices. The user experience there, the end-to-end user experience of using microservices is really difficult, really painful. And that's before we even throw in the business and development and operations challenges with the whole thing. The issue is it all sucks. And that's where we're at the moment. People ask me, why have I not finished my anti-fragile software book? I cannot easily write a book at the moment that I want to actually recommend you do things with in microservices because it's all very painful. And it's all very specific. I can't say, go and do event sourcing without giving you the unfortunate view that there may be about 18 different options about how you do it. And no clear reason why you'd use one over the other necessarily. So it's difficult. It's challenging, and the user experience sucks. And it comes, I think, from the complexity of adoption of microservices. You see, a lot of what the industry is doing right now is like this target. We're firing at it. One of those is Docker. Actually, if it was Docker, it probably should be a bigger bullet. Oh, no, just sheer money being thrown at it. So yeah, these bullets, holes around the edge are kind of what we're trying to do with microservices. People are addressing it from the bottom up. Some of it from the top down, but mostly from the bottom up. Because what you need is Docker and Weave and all these great things. The issues are that that's not really helping us hugely with the complexity of the problem. Because we're missing the center of the target completely, I think, at the moment. So we can do a lot better than this. And this is kind of a rallying cry, I think, for the industry, is that we can do a lot better. And we have a precedent set here. We can do much better than this. We've done this before. At least I've been involved with people before that have done this. Back in the day, when people were still using Java, there was this wonderful thing called J2EE, which had many of the same characteristics as microservice tooling and adoption does now. Huge toolkit of stuff, some of it very dangerous. EJBs, for example. Anyone remember the home interface? What was a great idea that was? Okay, so we had a problem with this, and some people, very smart, lovely people, who've been here this week, tried to solve this. They gave us Spring. Now, you may have had a mixed experience with Spring in your time, but I would ask you to go back to what it was like before it. Before there was an option there to do this. It was worse. The one thing that, I'm a big fan, but the one thing you can say for Spring is it made things a lot simpler. It actually simplified, it did its mission. It simplified enterprise Java. Enterprise there, I always think enterprise software is an interesting idea. Essentially, it should be spelled with a pound sign or a euro sign. So it's a way, if you're going to write some software, make it enterprise software because it costs people a lot more money. Okay, so we actually know how to do this. We saw how to simplify enterprise Java, which is a horrendous ecosystem to try and simplify. What we need to do now is simplify microservices. We need to turn the same eyes onto what we're doing with the tooling of microservices. Okay, there are some great initiatives in this direction, but I'm thinking something like Heroku for microservices would be kind of nice. Something where I can ask people to use event sourcing without you having to figure out which event sourcing system to use from the bottom up. I would love to get to a position where no one is talking about containers anymore because they're in there. Okay? They're an enablement, and it's not what you have to worry about anymore. And this is reducing the cognitive overhead of doing microservices. So this is the thing I'm doing now. I told you I used to be a consultant. I did. I've rehabilitated into society. I'm now a product developer, a product that you do not know yet and you cannot know yet, because I don't know completely what it is yet. But myself and a few others in the industry that you will know. If you're coming from enterprise Java land, you'll know people like Rod Johnson, you'll know Christian, you'll know Adrian Collier, these lovely people that also took on simplifying Java are now trying to do the same thing for microservices. And it isn't just going to be about us. I want you involved as well. If you care as much as I do about doing microservices, I think microservices are a fantastic idea. But if you care as much about actually making it simple to do it, get in touch with me, please. Because we're going to do it. We're going to make it a lot easier. We're actually going to have this presentation where I can deploy microservices for fun here. Okay, I go bam, 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 it's done. And it's secure. Security. Why doesn't the platform give you that guarantee? Why can't it? I'm sure it can. At least it can get you a long way towards it. And that is where the book's going now. It's got a new cover this week. And the aim is to characterize this simplification of microservices. I don't want to tell you the 1,400 different ways of deploying Docker containers to different clouds. I want to tell you to write microservices now and make them worth money now and do them right without you having to worry about it as much. Okay, so that's what we're doing. Please come and speak to me. Come and get involved. It's a great time to do it. If anyone was around the spring team when they were first kicking off, it's like that. It's brilliant fun. We are hacking everything. We are questioning everything to make it simpler. And that's all I can really tell you, unfortunately, for today. But hopefully I've explained the hump. I've given you some things, some tools to take away to maybe overcome the hump. And we've had some fun, and I hope the weekend has started for you. I'm obviously in Germany, so like any German, I'm drinking Czech beer. The weekend started for me. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of the day in the conference, and I hope to see you all again here next year for the same thing again, if the people running it haven't had enough. Oh, by the way, if we all bought one beer for the organizers of this conference, we would have the most entertaining thing to watch. I'm just suggesting, putting it out there. Okay, thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day.